ease and you're feeling a bit tired and you just loll off to sleep, and in your dreams you can hear the coconuts dropping, and you can start to dream about what happens when colleagues and academics and professional staff collaborate on explicit research skill development in courses and in degree programs. So what I'll ask Said to do is, I know a lot of you already know or seen the research skill development framework, but just to give me an idea, who's kind of to some extent aware of the research skill development framework that often looks like that? Just put up your hand so I know who is and isn't. Yeah. No, that's good. But you've got a copy there for your reading, but I'm not, as you can see by the title of the talk, is actually what happens when people use it. But just in general overview of the actual framework itself, so you're a little bit up to speed. The idea is that this framework looks at 6 facets of research. We use the word facet like you do a jewel that has different sides that sparkle and shine. So it's saying that research across disciplines has 6 sides that work in many different contexts. So I'll just quickly review those. And what we've done in this framework is elaborated those 6 into 5 degrees of autonomy. That is, how much structure and guidance do students need to be engaging in research processes, from the highly prescribed closed-ended level 1, red, to the blue end, level 5, which is open-ended, student-determined, students initiate. So, in terms of the facets, basically the 6 facets in quick succession, the students have to begin. They embark on their researching journey. They have to clarify exactly what they're after. They have to find relevant information from information sources and databases. They have to, in many contexts, generate data. They have to evaluate others' data, evaluate their own, and then reflect on the whole process they've used to do that. They have to then take data, organise it, manage it in ways that are discipline appropriate. They have to analyse the data once they've organised it, to look for the trends, characterisations. They have to do the complex task of putting it all together to make the coherent story that makes sense first to them, and then to others, to communicate it and to apply it in ways that are relevant to the research, with it being quite heedful of ethical, cultural and social issues all the way through. So they're the 6 facets that we're talking about, that you've got down in your left-hand column. In terms of degrees of autonomy, the first 3 levels are, you could say, faculty or educator initiated. So level 1, as I said, the red end, is highly prescribed. The next level along, which is orange, is bounded research. So there's some, where the river flows, there's banks, there's boundaries, and the river can flow anywhere in that. So there's limitations, but far less than the prescribed stuff. Move up a notch, then move into the yellow, where there's things scaffolded, like when you have a building. If you use the same scaffolding structure, but you can actually build quite different types of building with the same scaffold, but it's setting up a structure. The students have more independence, but it's all initiated by the educator. Then we move into the level 4 and level 5 are quite different. That's where students initiate. They pose the questions, they determine hypotheses, they determine how to generate data, how to evaluate it, etc. So the move towards fully open-ended is, we found, too big. So level 4, the green level, is that students have choice, but it's actually educator guided. So there's meetings, there's models of what people could do. It's not hands off the wheel stuff. Whereas the next level 5, the blue level, is open scope, where students will drive things, but it's not open slather. It's in accordance with the discipline. It's fitting with the literature. It's fitting with the gaps of the literature or what the students identify that is, so it's disciplined. And the more we're going through the years of university, the more disciplined it should be. Or in interdisciplinary studies, taking into account all the awkward and interdisciplinary connections that need to be made and what it would look like in that context. So disciplined or context. Now, we also have two other levels which we don't talk about much with undergraduates and aren't a focus of today, but I just showed them to you in case you haven't seen those before. That's moving into a realm which is clearly capital R research. The realm where it's creating the discipline by generating new knowledge, new to everyone, not just new to the student. So this is new to the student, typically, but this is moving into the unequivocally capital R, this is research. And level 6, the indigo, is where research is adopted by others. So you have no control of level 6. If your research is genuinely addressing gaps, then others start to use your work, cite your work, your communities of practice adopt your work, your procedures, your knowledge base. Level 7, very high-end, violet, is where you are actually changing the field, you're enlarging the field or consolidating the field or changing the shape of the field. People are talking differently about the field because of your contribution, so quite high-end stuff. So they're the degrees of autonomy. We brought in level 6 and level 7 to bring in the research-focused academics who could see everyone on the same continuum, from high-flying professor and teams who are giving high-level ARC funding, etc., to wherever an undergraduate student may be on this. Everyone's on the same page. And when we're talking about collaborations in an Ergo conference, if everyone's on the same page and can share a similar language, even though we may be at different positions, then it gives a much more sensible conversation and the potential for collegial interaction. Even if we argue, argument's good. This won't stop arguments. In fact, it might actually facilitate argumentation, but in a way that people actually understand what the others are talking about. Now, so you may have seen this, that we have been for 6 or 7 years using the framework to make explicit to undergraduate and master's students the development of their research skills in discipline-specific contexts. When I say we, I mean people like Say Dalsaroa here in electronic engineering. We've got Sophie Carey-Nicholas, who's in oral health. We've got Leanne McGann and Lynn Torres, who are from Monash Library, who've been using this framework in various contexts. For example, Sage started using it in masters, whereas Sophie and her colleague Kathy Snelling started using it more in first year students, first year of that. So when we started to find out what happens a year after students complete a course, that's a semester-length thing, depending on which nomenclature you use. This is what happens when one of the outcomes at the course level, this student said, I know this is 16 months after completing the course, into a workforce, in a business. I know that research is important, not only from an educational perspective, but if I'm in a work situation, it's just basically understanding what I want to achieve in my role with my customer and how I actually go about breaking that down into manageable, easy steps. So yes, it's got a practical application in my world. And what surprised us was that most students of the 41 were saying the same sort of things in a variety of contexts, not just at Monash in business, but oral health in science contexts. They were saying this sort of thing, that these skills are useful. And we thought, wow, that's really interesting that students wouldn't see these as esoteric ivory tower skills, but as actually practical for their job, or they're actually anticipating that they'll be useful in their job. And so we actually put together another grant application to look at that. And in fact, the byword, the second half, after the colon bit in the grant application, it's called Research Skill Development across degree programs. It's got a practical application in my world. So we're picking up on that very sentiment. And that's what I'm going to mainly focus on today. But an interesting finding from the external reviewer of our project, who interviewed a number of 17 academics of the 29 involved in the first one, is that Peggy Nightingale found that almost inadvertently, the academics found themselves thinking differently about the nature of research within the disciplines. The necessity for students at all levels to appreciate how research is conducted and to be initiated into the process themselves. and about how to inject these new perspectives into their teaching strategies. So this whole change of approach, using a conceptual framework to change their teaching, started to change the way they thought about research, about the way they thought that students should learn in their discipline, and started to create this feedback loop back into their teaching again. So there was a nice meshing between the research, their thinking about their research, and their thinking about their teaching. So that's some of the outcomes of the course level one. Now, that's available now on iFirst. University of Adelaide subscribes to Higher Education Research and Development, so you can go to iFirst and get the article by that name. So that's sort of out there. I did present that, I think, over last year actually. But I just want to reiterate that that was what drove the program level stuff. They were saying, well, this is okay when you've got academics who are really interested in one specific course. There's some good outcomes. But there was also some indications that if students went on for a couple more years and there wasn't explicit research skill development, there's some sense that some of the skills would atrophy, would actually die off. And that was what we were starting to pick up in interviews. So what these approaches started at University of Adelaide, and then Monash became involved very early on, and a number of universities, richly Monash, and then things has spread more and more over time, notably to back in our South Sea Island and the University of the South Pacific. Still imagine yourself balmy summer, balmy breeze under the palm tree. But it's interesting that now it's starting. Well, things are starting to affect universities in different ways. So Monash, in their strategic plan, skill development framework across all faculties and across their bachelor degrees. Now, when I say they have, Lynn and Leanne will tell you that there's certain areas of the uni haven't used the framework at all and are actually quite disinterested, maybe not opposed. But more and more people are becoming engaged and involved, and they ran a workshop yesterday about showing a number of different colleagues at the university have been not just responding to this, but responding to a lot of grassroots work that shows, this actually can work well with large diversity classes. Let's see what we can do. Surprisingly to me, and maybe to you, that University of Adelaide in July 2012, in its program development and approval guidelines, has said that new programs must demonstrate how the students develop academic literacy skills and a range of research skills commencing in the first year of the program. I've never seen that before. It just came out of the blue, as far as I can tell. But, so these skills that they're listing here, this research-based, like a lot of this sort of terminology, but they're saying these skills are the skills associated with research that are the facets of RSD. Well, some of the facets of the RSD anyway. So these are things that are starting to become also required by some universities to a greater or lesser extent. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I can't say. We'll actually hopefully evaluate that over time. But Lynn and Jan will tell you that now Monash has been sort of policy driving that for about a year. It complements the grassroots stuff that's been going on for about 3 or 4 years. And we've had grassroots stuff at University of Adelaide for about 7 years. So hopefully these sort of policies will complement rather than inflict on people. So I'm not showing it to say, yeah, you've got to do this. Quite the opposite. I feel a bit worried about policies because they can actually drive quite inappropriate behaviours, you could say. But it is something that's on the landscape. So honours in electronic engineering. So some states students will be here. They've been developing electronic engineering honours projects, and they've been doing that for years. For the last 3 years, the school has decided to frame honours assessments and to some extent the teaching with the research skill development framework to create specific marking criteria or rubrics that use early, middle and late in the year to make very clear and explicit that these 6 facets at a level 5 of autonomy, like quite a large degree of autonomy. So they're working on these projects, and then in the communication they've got in the nice atrium in the building this name I can't remember anymore. That one. It used to be, I know, but it's got a new name. But But they're presenting in that beautiful space, and school students are coming, a lot of just people drop in. So they're communicating their applied research often. Sometimes it's purely theoretical, but almost always applied, I think, and communicating it. So that explicit development that's going on in that case for a full year is one of the things we're working towards interviewing the students to find out what it means across a larger context. So what we're looking at is a progressive revisiting of the same skills over semesters of a degree program. So not just in one course, but in various contexts with various personalities who are driving the courses, various types of subjects, but increasing the degree of rigour and increasing the conceptual demand is what actually increases over the years. So what we've got is like 6 facets of research that we represented earlier: embark, generate, evaluate, organise, synthesise, communicate, and brief. But then develop richly in first year. So there's through 1 or 2 or 3 courses in a semester, first year, spiralling through into second year, maturing, developing. The students will say it's harder, maybe we'll describe it as harder, but it's conceptually more demanding, and we require more rigour. That's why a high distinction in year 1 is not comparable to a high distinction in year 2. Something slips, and we often don't clearly indicate to students what it is. But sometimes we require them to be more ... innovative, sometimes more creative as we move into year 3. Or as one academic said, more fearless, which may or may not work in your discipline the way you're marking. So adding degrees of rigour, adding degrees of discernment through the years is the idea. With Sophie and a colleague, Kathy, and Clinton Kempster and a number of the colleagues in oral health, now they've started to really explicitly develop research skills in 2 first-year courses and at least in 1 second-year course. And with the Open Slow, the capstone course, it's not got explicit development, but the students are upskilled in year 1 and 2 to write on that. And this student said, a year, again, RN interviewed this student, a year later, well, more than a year after they finished the whole degree program, the 3 years, the student said, in their clinical environment, so this is really in the work, well, it's just about being able to have a bit of a voice in the staff meetings, full stop, she's saying, about the fact that she's had these explicit research skill development. Like, it's nice being able to be listened to, and particularly by the dentists. And you've got to remember that there can be a power relationship here where dentists can be the top of the pecking order and oral technicians can be down here and they kind of talk down, you know, it can be like academic tutor relationship or something like that. You know. But this particular graduate is feeling empowered to talk to the dentist. It's nice being able to just to give your ideas, your research, what you found, and then the dentist accepting of it. So it's nice that way. I think research helps with that as well, because it's just not what you reckon. It's something you've researched and you are like, this is why I do it like this. And this is why us as a practice have chosen to do this, because through research we found. So they're finding that it's practical, that it relates to their job, that it empowers them, but it, as we'll see in the next quote, it relates strongly to patient care. And this student happened to do a 3-month placement in Cambodia during the year between graduating and being interviewed, and often working in a clinical environment in Australia too. Before I left for Cambodia, I actually took a silver fluoride, which is actually a product we don't even actually come into contact with in the Bachelor of Oral Health here, so no real strong previously background knowledge of it. I was really looking into that because I thought that might be really beneficial for Cambodia, because they don't get care often, and they're considered more rural. So I was doing a lot of research with that, and I ended up purchasing some, that's the silver fluoride, and taking it over with me. And I was using a lot when I was over there. So I can care better for patients. When you explicitly develop my research skills over first and second year, and I use those at a quite open into task in first year, I care for patients in Cambodia better. I can talk to the dentists and eliminate some of that power relationship. We've also interviewed our students in medical science, and they're typically ones who've gone into honours, and we've interviewed about 10, 13, 14 honours students. And this student had experienced research skill development in their first year of their undergraduate degree, and said, since the beginning, they've given us assignments based on this research skill development criteria. You might not have liked the assignments, maybe you get low self scores or low student evaluation, but because they've been consistently applying this structure to all of our assignments, we've come to think that way for science. In the perspective of science and writing, and a spooky bit, you might not know that you're following their guidelines, but you are. And that sense that they got into our minds. We now do it without thinking about it. It becomes natural. We know that through universities for 1,000 years, maybe 5% of students have been able to do that. They think like that, they become the PhD students. But now we've got a different context in 2012, and there are some students who will benefit from having a lot of structure and guidance and modelling and scaffolding early, and then over time you can give them more open-ended tasks. It could be in first year, more structure and guidance, and then some more open-ended in the second year. But eventually, a chance to drive things, a chance to initiate, to practice that. And, finish. Yep. So, I'll stop there. So, that's the sort of degree outcomes.
Any questions for John? Yes.
Sorry, I've got a comment. I listened to the presentation at lunch from Hewitt and Kosh about give them a fish or teach them how to fish. And I see a lot of similarities here between lifelong learning and what you're describing in the effects of the RSD program.
Oh, definitely, yes. In fact, in some contexts, like when I was with Lynn and Leanne in pharmacy, and pharmacy connects really well to lifelong learning, because as does medicine, typically, because they have ongoing professional accreditation. You've got to do these modules. My wife's a doctor, and the connection of lifelong learning is a really strong theme in certain disciplines, but not in every discipline. So for some people, lifelong learning is actually a very vague concept, because how do you assess? Like which university are you at?
Flinders.
Yeah, so we've got lifelong learning as one of our graduate attributes, which is really common, right? But people always get frustrated. Not everyone. A lot of academics get frustrated because how do I assess? They graduate. I'm not going to know if they're still lifelong learning in 10 years' time. So the idea of lifelong learning is an intentional or aspirational goal, but researching is a process that sets you up to be able to learn for life.
Yeah.
So the reality is, in a number of disciplines, to use the terminology of researching, it gives purpose. Lifelong learning gives you a sense of that I need to kind of stay up to date with information.
Yeah.
And that's important, but often the researching process is a process where I know I've got to actually find out about silver fluoride because I'm going to go to Cambodia. And if you've got those skills, then you're set up on graduation to potentially continue to, you may not, there's no guarantees, but it's coming at the same thing from a slightly different angle. And actually I think in contexts other than the ones I mentioned, it can be a more practical angle.
Aren't you giving them the fish and teaching them to fish? So you are giving them the structure of how to do research. So you're giving them a fish and then you're teaching them to fish.
Yeah, sometimes.
No,
sometimes you do give the fish so that they know what it's like to have the fish. Yeah. That's true. Because the level 1 stuff, the red level, this highly structured guide, you're right. No, you're right. I was actually laughing because I was disagreeing at first, but I agree now. This way, I really want to go fishing more because sometimes we say we'll teach them how to fish. Well, I don't want to fish. I don't know. I've never caught a fish before. I don't know what they taste like. I don't like fish like cow or like carrot. Yeah, that's a good point. The fish and the fishing.
One other thing that I would like to add also, the Australian Qualifications Framework is also aspirational. So at the end of the course, the students will have these skills or achieved whatever. And I think the RSD also develops those skills for those AQF standards to be met. So it's actually on a number of levels, the RSD really works well.
Yes. And Lynn and Leanne have been doing a lot of work with, say, for example, Bachelor of Pharmacy, which has been mapping in the existing program. So the courses in the program have been mapping the 6 facets of research and drilling down to kind of questions that would be posed, I suppose, for each facet, and looking at if they're assumed, taught, or assessed. So that kind of mapping, I know that mapping is becoming big, but there's some mapping that you have to be careful of. Tick box mapping that's quite trivial, and they've spent a fair bit of time on it. They're going to really, but it's this sense of purpose that they really want to develop their students' research skills across the degree program, so the mapping's been useful for them.
And the head of School of Pharmacy told us that it was valuable in getting their reaccreditation. And his whole idea of content being more important has been reversed. And he realises that there's the focus on skills to actually, be able to learn and engage in that content is a priority.
Yes, that's right.
Any other comment?
So,
1 minute.
oh, okay, well, then I'll wrap up. So, one of the reasons that there's a coconut tree is that we had the privilege of going to the University of South Pacific in Fiji, who became quite interested to explicitly develop their students' research skills. And it was in the context of their 12 member nations saying, what's the university contributing to the region where, potentially sinking? We've got environmental disasters, cultural disasters, we've got economic problems, unemployment. What's the university contributing? And so they're actually, as a policy now, they're going to be explicitly developing research skills across the whole degree program using the framework. And so when we were talking with USP, we started with a coconut, and we're saying, well, this is an idea that can float on the ocean, could land on the islands and grow up into a coconut tree, and then as it takes root and matures and develops fruit, then it can sort of, other coconuts can spread and spread throughout the South Pacific. So I hope you've felt a bit relaxed. Thanks for sticking around this last session, but think balmy South Sea drink. Yes, pina colada is outside next. So you can sail on a South Pacific high, leaving the palm tree behind. Thank you.
Please join me.